everyone, and welcome to a little lesson about circles. So today we are going to be using notes that are not from your Springboard textbook, but instead they are on this attached sheet, or you could just keep track of your notes in a separate notebook. Now, we've already talked in the previous lesson about completing the square and a review of that, and we're definitely going to use that piece today. So we're going to kind of scroll through here and focus more so on specifically the equation of a circle, which you probably haven't talked about since your geometry days. Now, the equation of a circle's standard form is x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared, and that's going to be equal to r squared, your radius value squared. I like to call it X hikers because it's X hikers, everything squared, right? That's kind of how I learned it to memorize it, but this is the standard equation. And what's nice about the equation of a circle is it tells us basically two things. One, that your center is at the point H comma K. Again, that'll be where the center of our circle is happening, and then R is the radius value of our circle. So if we're going to write the equation of a circle in standard form, you're going to plug in h and k and your r value each time. So x minus 1 quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals that r value squared, which you would want to rewrite as the most simplified version possible, which is 16 in this case, right? 4 squared. As r is 4, so r squared is 16. Oops. In our second example, we have some negatives that we're going to have to be careful of. So we have h and k. Notice your k is negative. And on this one, they did not give us the radius, but instead they gave us a point on the circle. So as we start plugging in on this one, we have x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k, which is negative 3 quantity squared, equals r value squared, which you don't know right now. Now, reminder, anytime you have minus a negative, that turns just into a plus sign. So it's kind of that opposite sign inside of the formula than it is when we actually state what the center itself is. Now, to help us find the value for r squared, you could use the distance formula between these two. But to save yourself some work, instead of plugging in for the distance formula and finding all that and memorizing that, what we can do instead is say, okay, if this is a point on the circle, it's going to satisfy this equation so that the left-hand side equals the right-hand side. So if we plug in 7 and negative 4 for x and y and simplify, that's going to be our r squared value. So when we do this, we end up with 7 minus 2 squared, which is 5 squared, and then negative 4 plus 3 squared, which is negative 1 squared. So 25 plus 1 is 26. So that's our r squared value. And we would want to write, again, our final answer, since they're asking us for the equation of our circle, x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k, in this case, plus 3 quantity squared equals 26. Your equation of the circle always is going to have x and y not plugged in. Is the final answer. Now, the next example, notice, gives us the endpoints of the diameter. So when we think about our circle here, we have the endpoints of the diameter, which means that we don't have the center and we don't have the radius given this time. So this time we're going to need to do two things: find that center and find the radius. So the center is going to be directly in between these two endpoints of our diameter. So you're going to add up your two x values and divide by 2. So 12 plus 18 divided by 2, and then negative 2 plus 4 divided by 2. We end up with 15 comma 1 as our center of the circle. All right, just finding that midpoint. And then the radius is going to be able to be found very similar to what we did in the last problem, because our radius, again, is from the center to an endpoint on the circle. And in this case, we have 2 endpoints on the circle. So pick your favorite, either 12 and negative 2, 18 and positive 4. I'm going to choose 18 and positive 4 because I like dealing with all positive numbers. I don't have to remember that negative. So we will plug in 18 and 4 for x and y. 18 minus 15 squared is going to be 3 squared, and then 4 minus 1 again is 3 squared. So our squared value is 18, and the overall equation of the circle again just has h and k plugged in for our final answer. Last but not least, the area of our circle is given in this one instead of the radius. And a reminder, the area of a circle is pi r squared. So in this case, if we cancel out the pi's, we actually have the r squared given as 58. And then they gave us h and k this time because they gave us our centers. So x minus -9, so that turns into +9, quantity squared, plus y minus k, quantity squared is going to equal 58, our r squared value. Now, where does all of this connect with the completing the square? Well, oftentimes they are not going to give us our our circle in standard form. And they're going to give it to us instead in this non-standard form. So what we're going to do is we are going to complete the square so that it is in the format that we are used to for a circle like we had up above, so that it's easier for us to identify pieces like the center and the radius. So to do this, we're going to have the same process as we did in the completing the square video, which if you did not watch, I would highly recommend doing, pausing this video and doing so now. And we're going to take the b value for each of these, divide by 2, and square that value. That's what goes in the blank here and here. So whatever you do to the left, you must do to the right. And then divide by 2 here and square that value, +1. It's added to both sides. And then we're going to factor. What multiplies to be 64 adds to be 16. Shortcut is the number you get when you divide by 2. And we're going to square it. And then here we have our b value divided by 2, 1. What multiplies to be 1 adds to be 2. Again, it's shortcut y plus 1. And then -64 plus 64 plus 1 just ends up equaling 1. So now we have our standard form of our circle. And what this is going to allow us to do is identify some key pieces. First and foremost, the center, right? If we're at x plus 8 and y plus 1, that means that our center is going to be at -8, -1, because it's like saying minus -8 and minus -1 for our x and our y. Okay, so -8, -1 would be our center. And then our radius, our r squared value was 1. So that means our r value when we square root also happens to be 1. So when we graph, we're going to graph that center at -8, -1, and then we're going to go 1 unit up, down, to the left, and to the right to help us graph our picture of our circle. We have a second example here that we're going to need to complete the square for. So we have x squared plus 4x plus blank plus y squared minus 6y plus blank. And we're going to have to boot that 36, it's just a constant, to the other side. So we're going to add it to the other side, and then we have blank and blank. So again, we will need to complete the square by dividing by 2 and squaring. And do the same thing with the y's since they have a value as well. Square it, we end up with 9. And last but not least, when we factor, we have x plus 2, quantity squared, plus y minus 3, quantity squared. And this time we end up with 49 when we add together 36, 9, and 4. So our center is at -2, +3. Again, reminder, x minus a negative for that k value. So -2, +3 is our center. And then the radius is going to be the square root of 49, which is 7. So when we graph it this time, we're going up, down, left, right, 7 units from our center. So here, And then 7 units to the left here, down 7, and to the right 7. So when we connect it, we have our graph here of our points. Oops, it was a little big on that. There we go, connect there. Okay, some other pieces to note. We talked about this a little bit earlier, that the area is pi r squared of a circle. Circumference is 2 pi r, or pi times the diameter. And then when we talk about something being inside, outside, or on the circle, it is going to be inside of the circle if our r squared is value is larger. If we could plug in, the x and the y points on the left and then compare it to the r squared, it's going to be outside of the circle if what we plug in is greater than r squared, and it would be on the circle if they were equal to one another. Okay, and we'll talk more about these examples in class, but there's just definitely some other pieces you are going to want to have written down. Okay, thanks everyone for watching this circles review, and we'll work more with circles in class.